Clever.
Hopefully.
Oh, wow.
All right, I will just check now. Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our episode tonight looking at dyslexia and relationships. Before we get started, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm meeting on tonight, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and to pay my respects to elders, both past, present, and emerging. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I'd like to welcome Nicholas and Lasksmi to the show today. Hello.
Hi, Shae.
Hi, Shae. G'day.
G'day. It's interesting to hear you say g'day when you're sitting over in England at the moment. It's an early start for you guys. So thank you for joining us.
Yes,
No
cold, wet, dreary England.
We've had some sun today in Melbourne, which has been lovely.
Oh, that's nice.
Oh, don't tell us that.
So Nicholas has been kind enough to do a podcast with myself and his mum, which we launched earlier this year. And we got talking around some of the challenges that people with dyslexia can face in a relationship. And Lasksmi reached out to me because we're both doing our doctorate, so she's doing PhD, and we were talking about different research that's out there to support couples where one person has dyslexia and the other person doesn't. And what we realised is there isn't a lot of research out there at the moment, and it's also a topic that hasn't really been discussed a lot. And so we thought it was a great opportunity for us to come together to have a bit of a chat around some of the challenges, but also some of the great things about being in a relationship with someone that has a learning disability. So we'll get started. We were talking about the research that's come out of New Zealand, Lasksmi, around how dyslexia can affect a relationship. So what is day-to-day life like for you and Nicholas?
So
I think you're better to answer that.
well, right now in lockdown, all the days kind of bleed into each other and they all kind of look the same. But so typically we both work from home these days. I'm finishing up my PhD and Nick works at a consultancy. So we kind of, have breakfast and then we go off to our respective workspaces and then we finish up at the end of the day. But before lockdown, we had a bit more of an active life and we would go off to the gym every morning and then we would go off to work, each of us. I had a little workspace in the library here, so I would go and work there. And then we would just come back and have dinner. Otherwise, day-to-day life is just we like hiking, so we would typically, at least in the summer, make time to do it. And this year has been much harder to do any kind of hiking or get out at all. But on the whole, I think that's pretty much our life. It's fairly simple. We're both kind of introverted, so we're not hugely social people, but we do have some close friends that we meet on occasion.
Both highly academic.
Oh, I suppose so.
Yeah, a lot of our friends were from, well, we still have a lot of friends from when we were students here, 3 or 4 years ago, and so we've maintained that friendship, which is nice. But other than that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so since lockdown, have you found it harder to manage some of the dyslexic traits that happen day to day, Nicholas, that then have flowed into home life, because it's hard to separate home life and work life when you're in the same location all the time?
It is difficult to separate those two. As per how the dyslexia component of that has affected things, I don't think it's affected it too much. I guess staying on task can be a bit more difficult, but I don't think it's too bad. I think it's I haven't noticed too much of a change. What would you say?
I guess it's just maintaining our routine was well set before, so it threw us for a loop a little bit at the start of lockdown. So I think especially for Nick, we had to just make sure that we're still productive and getting things done, and keeping to a time. But I think another issue that maybe Nick has had is that he when I think when he works, he just keeps working and working and working, and sometimes he doesn't stop. And I think I've sort of stepped in to enforce the, like work hours and home hours kind of boundaries around work.
But I think that was like fairly.
Yeah.
I think that was like I've gotten better at that in the last.
Definitely.
Like that wasn't such a problem when the epidemic started. That was a problem
pre-existing problem.
Maybe last year. But I also figured I think I also got through that last year.
That's true.
In a large respect, I think my work has changed a little bit because of the epidemic and the focus that I do. I'm doing something that's a little bit more tailored to my skills and expertise. So that's nice. Yeah.
And do you find that time management, particularly now you're working from home, is a challenge? I know for me, like I'm always late for dinner. I try really hard not to be, but when you're sitting at your desk all day and you roll into the evening, being able to step away and manage your time so that dinner's only a second walk away, but I still manage to be late nearly every night. So have you found that time management around the home activities versus work has been any different or challenging?
Yeah, it's not easy, I guess, but I think we've figured it out to some degree. I think, yeah, there definitely was like a period in earlier this year where I was struggling to keep on task with things, but I think it's much better now.
Yeah.
Thanks to Lakshmi.
I think in the case of lockdown, we had just also returned from Australia. We'd gone there for a short trip. And essentially when we got back, lockdown was instituted. And then all this modeling work started to really take off for Nick. And I think it was just so busy because, the work has to be done very quickly. So I think the early days of lockdown, we really kind of struggled to maintain any semblance of a home life.
Yeah.
Because I think breakfast was probably the only meal we would like always have together. Otherwise it was, he sometimes worked through dinner, and lunch is definitely a quick meal that you just grab. So, but now it's become a bit better. So. Yeah.
And so I should have written my question down because it's gone out of my head when you were talking about working in lockdown. I've noticed that I don't have, because I used to have peer support around helping me with like checking my emails and reports and things like that. Other managers would help me, and now I have to rely quite a lot on my partner. Now, Nicholas, I know you're in the maths area, and Lakshmi, I don't think that's kind of the area you're working in, but do you need Lakshmi's help for those type of activities that normally impact on someone that has dyslexia in the workplace?
You're asking me that if Lakshmi has problems that or the other way around.
Does Lakshmi need to do any editing for you or help you with any things that if you're in the workplace, you might have had colleagues supporting you with?
I don't know how colleagues, I don't think support me too much in regards to like we don't have someone who in the company who edits specific things. That would normally be done by managers and stuff. But then again, I think it's no secret that my grammar is not particularly high standards. In that it's generally pretty bad, but or at least that's what Lakshmi, I'm sure, thinks.
No, I don't think that.
So I think she does it, like having Lakshmi just like go over things, or just like I guess look at maybe an email or something, or just proofreading things a small bit has really helped in professional settings. Would you say?
Yeah, of course. I think that's true. Yeah.
I found that being at home, I rely much more on my partner now to do that proofreading and editing that normally I'd have someone at work do for me.
Right.
But I think, sorry, go on.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, more to the point, like I have to admit that I'm maybe not the best communicator with other people. And I think Lakshmi that's probably where the point that Lakshmi really helps me personally is just communicating with other human beings, and in that she has a better understanding of what sort of people expect and those unset expectations. in that I don't know if this is typical of other people, but I tend to take things very literally, and that what people say is what they actually mean. And since then, I've come to realize that it's not always true. There is a little bit of like an unsaid expectation or something that, like, well, we didn't say you had to do this, but we assumed that that was meant. And she just helps me interpret that sometimes, which is invaluable.
So communication seems to be, from the research I've read through Neil Alexander Passe and James' work from New Zealand, is communication can be quite tricky for couples, particularly if we end up in a bit of a disagreement. The way that someone with dyslexia would respond can generally be that they kind of shut down because they either can't find the words, or because they feel like they're being attacked, that they can't process what's being said to them. And so they have a tendency to kind of leave the environment rather than trying to address it. Have you found that communication between the two of you can be at times like that, or similar to what we've read around the research, Lasksmi?
Oh, definitely. I mean, there was definitely a learning curve for me. I mean, I have to say, when I met Nick, like, I had a very rudimentary understanding of dyslexia, but I was quite ignorant about how it could manifest itself in daily life. And to be honest, I kind of thought, he's at Oxford, so how bad can it be? I kind of thought it's kind of in the past. And it took me some time to realize this is very much still a daily challenge. And it took me some time to realize the particular details of Nick's dyslexia, because it's different for everyone, I think. So I realized he's auditorily dyslexic. So if I give him oral instructions, he's not going to be able to retain it very well, or they're not very useful for him. Like, there's this one time when we were in temporary accommodation in Oxford, and the recycling and the landfill and everything was a bit tricky. And I told him, okay, this color bag goes in this, and this you have to separate from this and put it in this one. And it was just one of those things that involves lots of details and was retaining information that's communicated orally. And I should not have done that, because, like, I think I totally confused Nick, and he found it really difficult to remember, and he put everything in the wrong boxes. Some time to figure out how I need to communicate and how I need to change my way of communicating with him. So definitely, yeah, it's a challenge, one we've worked on.
What are some of the strategies? At one point, my partner put a picture up above the oven to remind me which way to turn the oven on, because we'd end up having dinner really late because I hadn't put it on properly and the food was cold. So and so now I'm really conscious of when I go to turn the oven on, which way am I turning it? So what strategies have you put in place that you think have helped both of you in managing day to day?
None that relates to food. I'm generally the one who cooks.
Well, that's good for you too. You're not having any cold dinners.
I feel like that should be stated quite clearly.
Yeah, that's true. Nick does most of the cooking. I mean, I try not to give oral instructions, okay? And we'll be talking about something important, and I'll be firing off things like Nick has to remember, or like things he might want to consider, and it doesn't work. So we always then sit with a notebook, and then we talk about it, and so Nick can take notes. Or another way is I just text it to him and I write it down, instead of just trying to communicate it orally. But a big part has also been adjusting my own expectations, because I would tell Nick some story that is important to me, and then in the early days of our relationship, I would get upset if he didn't remember all the details, which I thought it meant that he didn't care about what I had told him, or he hadn't paid attention. But it's just that it's really hard for him to remember those kinds of details. So I think working on myself and my own expectations from him, I think, have been important.
Yeah, I've given up on giving Lasksmi visual information as well, because it just goes in one ear and out the other. Yeah, that's true. Like, I think, like, there'll be times when I would be able to remember. I think Lasksmi gets really annoyed when I don't remember sometimes, like, every single detail of things she's told me, and like that's very hard for me to do. But normally I remember like 50% of what was said or something in the last week, or whatever, some percentage or whatever. And like, I try and remember everything, but I don't always catch everything. Yeah, so that can be a bit hard, I think. Yeah, particularly someone who remembers things like months ago.
But I have a really good long-term memory, but short-term memory is not great. So it really annoys my sister because she says, "How do you remember that from childhood?" I'm like, "I don't know. I just remember it." Day-to-day stuff, it can be challenging. Are there other day-to-day things, Nicholas, that where your dyslexia impacts you in home life?
Home life. It's interesting. Like I think we have very different skills. Like we have very different skills. Lakshmi can read 1,000,000 miles a minute, and she'll go through a book in a day or something, which would take me a month or something ridiculous. And I don't understand how someone could go through that without skipping a couple of pages. But on the other hand, I'm quite good with visual reasoning, and so I could look at a map and know instantly where we are, where we need to go, and the route to get there. And that's something I've like developed. I've had for most of my life. Those are skills that come pretty naturally to me. So that when we go hiking, it's like I know, of course, I know the route that we're going to take. But for Lakshmi, that's a developing challenge.
It's funny you say that because I was going to ask you, how are you when you go hiking? Who does the navigating? Because I can't read a map to save myself. I could get lost just walking around Melbourne sometimes. It's so frustrating. And I've lived here my whole life. So it's interesting that that's one of your skills. And it's, you know, when we talk about challenges in relationships, I mean, we both bring strengths in areas that, like anything in life, that we're not as good at.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you must go on some nice hikes.
That's true. Nick does all the navigation. It's really interesting. Like, I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess like in our home life, like how we kind of, the challenges, we've kind of figured out a system based on what each of us is good at. So I do the details and Nick will do the big picture kind of planning and that kind of stuff. So I think over time we've realized, you know, some tasks suit one person better than the other. And we've kind of figured out a system around that. But yeah, definitely. Like, yeah, packing, planning for a hike, navigating, that's all me.
And so one of the things that people with dyslexia can struggle with, and I got asked this question the other night in an interview, is managing money. And so I have a lot of different strategies in place to make sure I can manage money, and we meant how we manage our budget. So was things like that ever an issue for you, like those practical things, or like reading contracts, or if you needed to sign up for rent or a mortgage or things like that? Is it one person's more responsible around that fine detail and management?
You know, I mean, actually, when you say it now, like it reminds me, like every time we go somewhere and there has to be a form that's filled out, like I'll do it for Nick as well, because it just takes me probably lesser time and it's less stressful for me to do it.
And you don't want to read my handwriting.
Yeah, so I definitely look after, like, I mean, yeah, all the rent agreements, other like a lot of paperwork for, like, we had to do an Australian visa for me, a lot of the paperwork around that and organization, like I took care of that. Money, I think I would say we're both kind of equal. Like Nicholas is actually like much better than me at being restrained and saving and keeping to a budget, whereas sometimes I can lose track of that. So yeah, neither of us are like amazing, I would say, at managing money, but we're both, I think, fine, and we've come to like a kind of a balance with that. But yeah, definitely I do the more of the attention to detail tasks for sure. Paperwork, that's all me, definitely. Yeah.
And we should have said at the start, sorry, what areas you both work in, because Nicholas, you've been to Oxford. If people haven't heard our podcast conversation, and you know, people may not think they have the opportunities to do things like that. So can you just give a little bit of background to like what you both do?
Sure.
You want to go first?
Yeah. Well, actually, Nick and I both met when we were in Oxford. I was doing my master's there and he was doing his PhD.
DPhil.
DPhil. Yes. But yes, I'm now finishing up a PhD at the University of Edinburgh, and I research violence against children. So yeah, I mean, I used to be a lawyer in a past life in India, back in India. I grew up in India. And yeah, Nick, do you want to tell us what you said?
I have a master's. So I started off my degree as a mathematician and engineer in Tasmania. I got really interested in maths because I found it just came pretty naturally to me. And then from there, I went on to do a DPhil in mathematics at Oxford. I had some challenges there, but I got through it. And then I went through a postdoc at Imperial doing infectious disease modelling, and I'm now at an international development consultancy at Oxford. Most recently doing more infectious disease modelling, ironically. So it's all good fun.
And you met at Oxford, and one of the questions that came through from the UK last night was around cultural differences and dyslexia in a household. And Nicholas is from beautiful Australia originally, even though has moved around a little bit. And you're originally from India. So have you found that culturally those differences, like when you first met, you thought, oh, he's at Oxford, it's not going to matter, his dyslexia. But as you progressed, do you think there's been any cultural differences that have impacted on with the dyslexia as well?
I think that is an interesting question. I hadn't really thought of that. In terms of like adjusting to each other's culture, is that you're asking?
Yeah, we had some questions come through last night from LinkedIn from people from the UK, and one of the questions was around, how do you manage if you both come from different cultures and then one person's dyslexic? Does that have an impact as well? Trying to manage the differences just within your cultural differences. I mean, my ex-husband's from the UK, and there were cultural differences between us. So the cultural differences and then the overlay of dyslexia, do you think that makes it challenging sometimes?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's also a pretty loaded one. I think it really just comes down to acceptance. I think we're both fairly accepting people. That I remember growing up from the very earliest age thinking that like I don't have to apologize for who I am, or I don't have to explain who I am to anyone. I'm quite comfortable in my own skin. I'm quite like I've accepted completely who I am, and I'm just waiting for the rest of the world to do that. And I've been thinking like that since a very early age. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that mentality of thinking like that, particularly as a kid. But when it comes to in a relationship, that does require some adjustment. I found it's like I haven't really cared about anyone's opinion except my own. And I think as a kid, like having that confidence in yourself is really important. But like when you are come to a relationship, it does like, okay, this is someone I have to actually learn to accept their opinion and their thoughts on. And that's been a process that's adjusted for me. But Lakshmi, you've come from the complete opposite spectrum, where it's like your opinion about yourself doesn't matter; it's other people's opinion. So I think that has been a shift in you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually it has impacted our relationship, I would say, on the whole. Like I come from India, and it can be a very unforgiving sort of culture in many ways. It's very you have to be very driven, and mistakes are not tolerated very much at all. And like Nick said, a lot of other people's opinions matter. So I think for me, like fundamentally, like on some level, I found it very difficult. Like I pride myself on not making the same mistake again, and I can be very harsh with myself. And it took me some time to just accept.
Sometimes too harsh.
Yeah, very harsh. And it took me some time to accept. It took me a long time actually to just accept Nick. Like for a long time I was helping him. So I think in the back of my mind I thought, oh, if we work hard enough, we can fix these things. And and I've had to really work to move away from that kind of thinking. And I think that's a very cultural thought process in the back of my head. And I've had to really move away from that to really just accept my partner for who he is, and accept that they're going to make mistakes. Like I will make mistakes, but they're just going to make very different kind of mistakes from me. And it took me some time to really do that, but Nick is very easy about that. He's accepted that about himself, but I found it much harder to accept.
It's also an ongoing process. Yeah. It's also an ongoing process. It's not like everything. It's it's still going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it ever, regardless of culture, any relationship, it's an ongoing process of negotiation and improvement, I think.
Yeah.
But do you think in India, is there, I mean, dyslexia, there's generally 1 in 10, there's up to 20%, depending on what country you're in. Do you think that it's accepted within your family and within your community around these type of challenges, or do you think their thinking is that you should improve and you should get better and it should go away?
I think it's probably a mix of both. And like, I haven't lived in India in a few years, so I don't know about the recent like trends, but I would say it's largely rendered invisible. Like for most of my life, I actually don't know anybody who was dyslexic. And there was somebody in my life that was, but who was probably thought they were just slow or dumb or not very good at certain things. And they were kind of, passed over, and I went to one of those schools that was just very, very much achievement driven. So if you didn't do well, like it was just very bad, academically. You could be ostracized. There's just a lot of pressure to succeed and to achieve. So I mean, I think so in a large way, like I would think the attitudes are more to fix people, or to cover up what they are not good at, to get them on a successful path, rather than to, I think, accept things as they are, accept people as they are. So yeah, but I do know, like my best friend's mother, she worked with lots of kids who had learning disabilities. But that was like one school in Chennai when I was growing up. It was not common at all, and it was very much like special education. It was definitely not common in a mainstream setting.
It's also out that like the teaching system in South Asia is very much focused on exams, and if you're terrible at sitting this one exam, then that could really really do something detrimental to your life. Just this one exam or like a few exams could really like turn you upside down. Like in math, you said was highly prized, and but you weren't that great with math.
No, I wasn't.
So like it could be more of like just assuming that if you're not good at these a few exams, then you're not
a good,
then you have no worth in life or have no purpose. But
yeah.
I think I heard in Singapore that from a young age you're kind of put into 2 streams, the academic or the stream where you're not going to be academic, and it doesn't matter if you improve, you're kind of stuck in that stream then for the rest of your life, which is a really interesting way of enabling people to be educated.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that from a young age. Like from the time I was 6 years old and in first grade, I had like what we called assignments. So they were weekly tests, and then we had 3 sets of exams a year. And you're just really, if you get like below 20 out of 25, you get scolded, and the teacher will call your parents, and it's a very stressful environment from a young age.
I can imagine. I would not have done well. Maths and English, no. Would have been in a lot of trouble. So, I mean, we're coming to our end of our session. So thank you so much for coming to talk to us today, to me today. Are there any key areas you want to talk about? Any suggestions for people that might be listening, or that I can't see any questions coming through, but if people watch this and afterwards, some of the highlights or some of the areas that you think you've had to work on. I mean, from our conversation, a lot of it's been, negotiation and understanding and empathy for each other, and both of your strengths and areas where you need extra support within your relationship. Is there anything you'd like to let our listeners know around the ups and downs of dyslexic relationships?
Yeah, I guess we were talking about dyslexia and mental health, and that conversation, I guess, is starting to happen a bit more. But like, I think when I met Nick, he was in his DPhil, and I think he was really struggling with his mental health. And I think that's been an ongoing sort of journey for us as well. For me personally, it has been really interesting to see how Nick copes with his anxiety around being dyslexic, or dealing with a task that he finds very difficult to do, and how he copes with it. And I think he's become much better at it. with time, and I think that's something we both worked on together.
Yeah, I think largely that has been because of Lakshmi has got me to really face that side of my tendencies or something, and work at adjusting them. So no, she's really helped me in that regard.
But I guess it's also that, you know, Nick's dyslexia impacts me too. Like, I honestly didn't really expect that at the start of our relationship, you know, and it impacts my mental health. Like, I suffer when he's anxious and when he's upset or he's had a failure in some way, and that can be really hard on both people. And I think it can be challenging, but it can be really valuable to work through that, to keep that conversation going. I think now we check in with each other a lot more about how we're feeling, and like, I don't know if we really did that at the start and of our relationship, but I think that's been really valuable. So I think like really thinking about how mental health can play a huge role in how couples cope with dyslexia can be a valuable conversation.
And so would you suggest people going to get external support if they found like one person was struggling with their mental health more than the other, particularly if it's the dyslexic kind of challenges that they're both trying to manage?
Yeah, definitely. I think external support can be really helpful. You know, if it is appropriate for, you know, that situation, that person, like, I would definitely suggest that, you know, they should probably go and seek external support. I mean, yeah, but maybe like look for a therapist who has worked with or who's aware of the specific challenges of the learning disability and how it can impact life. Yeah.
I know in the UK, I think it's Groups, GROOPS. They do a lot of work around supporting mental health and wellbeing, and I think couples as well, that where one partner's dyslexic. So if anyone's from the UK listening, I know you could tap into them. I know that we've talked a little bit, everyone, here's the book that's up online. Jane, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce her surname, but when I interview her, I will be able to. But she's done some great work out of New Zealand as well, and also Neil Alexander Passe, who's done quite a lot of work now. And I did a podcast with him, which we'll be launching soon, and we talked a little bit about relationships as well. I mean, I'm very openly speak about my ongoing access to a psychologist, and my partner will now say to me, have you made your appointment, or have you seen him lately, and just checks in to make sure that I'm managing my mental health, because it is a real issue. And I can only imagine, Nicholas, working in academia. I know when I go to uni, like the feeling imposter syndrome, or that I'm not quite good enough doing academic work and being dyslexic. I can only imagine how that may feel being at Oxford, one of the most prestigious universities in the world, and whether you feel that imposter syndrome that might impact on your mental health and well-being.
Oh, I reckon if you did a survey in Oxford and how many people have that, you'd probably find like over half of the students there had that to some degree. Like Lakshmi was the top of her class in her masters, and you had imposter syndrome pretty bad. And like, yeah, a lot of my friends had that. It's difficult. It's not easy. And it's also, I think, the nature of academic work is very much like isolationist, anti-collaborative, competitive nature. And that makes things like that very difficult. The environment that I'm in now in consultancy is, to some degree, I think, the complete opposite, in that it's very much a collaborative environment as much as possible, and it's just very different. Yeah.
Well, that's good to hear. And I think also, sorry, I'm just checking on Facebook to make sure we don't have any questions before we wrap up. I think it's good for our listeners to hear that, you know, it is possible to go to university, and it is possible to have a relationship, and that, you know, there's different supports out there if they need it, and that you two have really exemplified both what we can achieve if we want to continue through higher education, but also, you know, how we can manage in healthy, successful relationships. So I really, really appreciate you coming on today and to help start this narrative in Australia, because we've never had it before. So it's really exciting to have these conversations. We've got one person online. I just want to see, Chrissy, did you have any questions? I'm just checking Facebook to see if we've got anyone before we wrap up.
I'd like to say thank you. It is fabulous to see you launching this discussion. And for me, I think it was the first time that I realised that I take things very literally. And I think I've been, and Nicholas, you know, mentioned how Lasksmi has been helping him negotiate that. And I'm in my 60s, and it's really the first time it's dawned on me that perhaps it's not other people. Perhaps I've missed stuff in being so literal, in believing that people actually mean what they say and that they'll do what they say. So thank you for that little challenge to myself. That was fabulous.
I've always, it's really confusing to me, like, because if you're not supposed to take things literally, then how are you supposed to take things? It's like, how are you supposed to interpret something if not literally?
I've struggled with it as well. I really have. And my dad's really bad at taking things literally. But yeah, particularly when I was younger, like I have to check in still now and say, is that true? Is that, or is someone just having a joke, or is someone just, you know, hasn't explained it in a certain way? So I think it seems to be a common trait with people with learning disabilities.
Yeah, I guess like it's not very fair, is it? Like we kind of, I mean, I kind of can sense the implicit of what is left unsaid in a conversation, whereas Nick can't often pick up on that. And yeah, it can be quite difficult to interpret or to know what the other person's expecting you to do if you don't know what they're not saying. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is that I think for me, social cues really bypass me, and I was just like, I won't even pick up on the most obvious social cues, which I'm not saying is necessarily a good thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing either in what it is as well. Yeah, but it's also like, I think as being a dyslexic person, I think university has really done some amazing things for me. There were teachers in my university who really inspired me to do things, several of which I think are dyslexic and in an interesting, like in a similar relationship to Lasksmi and I could put you in touch with them if you wanted to. And I'm sure they'd have some really interesting discussions as well.
Yeah, maybe we could have a big panel discussion on the different, whether we're all having the same challenges or whether they're completely different. But it's been really refreshing to speak to you both tonight, and makes me feel reassured that I'm definitely not alone. And I think it will make many people that have either joined us tonight or that watch this back feel the same. So thank you so much for coming on the show today and for raising some of those key issues around mental health and wellbeing and just the day-to-day ups and downs that we can all have. Really, really appreciate your time. So thank you so much. Thank you, Chrissy, for joining.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. You guys are wonderful. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you so much. And we look forward to hopefully catching up with you at another point. But for now, make sure you stay well. Hopefully you get out to have some hikes since COVID.
Maybe when we return to Australia at some point.
Yeah.
That'd be wonderful. Yeah.
Yes.
But for now, stay safe, and thank you again for giving up your time and for being so open and honest.
You too.
Of course, you too.
Thank you. Have a wonderful Saturday.
You too. Bye.
Bye.